It is my pleasure to introduce the first webinar of this new webinar cycle. As many may recall, there has been already a webinar cycle on the topic of the science of the face, organized by our team, the Facets team. First, let me speak a word about the Facets team. Facets is an interdisciplinary research project funded by the European Research Council and based at the University of Turin. Facets PI is Massimo Leone, who is among the attendees and who is about to say hello to Paul and to everybody. We investigate the human face across all the kind of media, especially technological media nowadays. And this is the first cycle of the new and now international webinar of the sciences of the face. You might notice that there is a plural here because the face is just such a complex object that we realize we cannot just rely on psychology and neuroscience as I used to do, but we need to interrogate every facet, well, of the human knowledge. And Paul is surely one very good person to start with. He's an internationally renowned scholar with an interest in emotion, which led him to get into social robotics. In Italy, we have probably heard about his last book translated by Raffaello Cortina, Vivere con i robot, Living with Robots, written with Luisa Damiano. He's a Canadian philosopher now working in Japan, where it's afternoon. And I'm very glad that he is here because he is the kind of the last speaker of our first year of project, which is about the artificial faces. And before getting into the topic of cultures of faces, which is also a topic in which Paul is pretty skilled, we have this last reflection on making faces. Before switching to Paul, I will invite Massimo to come in and say hi if he wants to.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much, Marco, for setting up this webinar. And my thanks also to Professor Paul Dumouchel. It's very gracious of his to participate in this series of online events. Hopefully one day he will visit us in Turin as well, in Italy, when things calm down. But he is certainly a philosopher and thinker with a very complex approach and with a tremendously interdisciplinary perspective. So we look forward to hearing his considerations on this very multidisciplinary and complex matter. So we're all eager to listen to him. I give him the floor and I thank him once again for this participation.
Thank you, Massimo. Just a couple of rules. We've got about 45 minutes to listen to Paul, and then after that, we will begin the party, the Q&A party, and I will be the moderator. I now mute myself and invite Paul to the floor with another thank you very much.
Well, okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much to Marco Viola and to Massimo Leone for their introduction and for inviting me to participate in this very interesting project. As I was explaining to Marco yesterday, actually, I never really worked on the face, and that was kind of the face as such, taken individually. And that was kind of an interesting challenge to do that. So I will actually read that talk. It's one of my boring characteristics. I read my talks. It is divided into 3 sections. One, which is the first one, is entitled Faces as Action. The second one is Faces and the Expression of Emotion. And the third one is Robots. So faces and action, as action to begin with. So what are you making faces at? Why are you making that face? Or stop making faces, we say to others, usually friends, lovers, or children. When it is addressed to someone we do not know or to a subordinate, or to one we do not like. What are you making? Why are you making faces is usually aggressive and challenging. Making a face is an expressive gesture, but usually more complex than simple diastics or indexical. Faces are neither mere indexes nor readouts that directly reveal a person's emotion or mental state. Faces often are more or less conventionalized representative gestures that many times function as quasi-propositions. A few examples will illustrate this claim. Imagine you're telling a friend about an incident that happened to another friend, perhaps a common acquaintance. And here you are saying, and there was John, sitting peacefully drinking his coffee, when a bear came through the door. So he pushed his table away and got up from his chair and went, whoa. As you say, you push your own chair backward, and as if you're getting up, but you don't, and make a face of surprise and fear, perhaps also saying, whoa. Actually, the whoa in the previous sentence does not necessarily represent what John said, as much as it indicates the kind of face that he made. Now, the face that you, the speaker, make at this point does not in any way indicate your emotion. Since you are not presently being threatened by a bear, you know how the incident unfolded afterwards, and the dominant mood of the story is humor, as the whole thing turned out to be rather funny. It is not your emotion that the face that you make reveals to the listener. Rather, it represents or illustrates the face that you assume John would have made to such a circumstances. The face you make is thus a narrative tool. It is required by the story, not by the incident, and adds to the dramatization of the narrative. Your facial display is a way of conveying an important or amusing aspect of what happened. Like words and language, the faces and other gestures that we make in cases such as this are conventional representation, here of fearful and surprised facial and bodily expressions. They are conventional representation of typical human reaction in striking and unexpected or potentially dangerous incidents. Faces in such cases are expressive not of the speaker, but of what he or she is talking about, and therefore a representation of events which are absent. They are not readout of the speaker's present internal state, but representation of something that happened somewhere else at some other time. At this point, the listener in response will often make a similar face of surprise and fear, indicating by her mimic that she is interested in the story you're telling and that she recognizes the meaningfulness of your depiction of John's fear and surprise. In doing so, she resorts to the same conventionalized expression of fear and surprise. However, it is neither to indicate her own fear and surprise, nor to describe John's reaction, but as a sign of affiliation and togetherness. Here also, as in the case of language, the same conversational unit can be used to do two completely different things. Just as I can say to you, get out of here, to order you to leave, said with a different tone of voice, the same expression, it indicates that I find that what you just said is unbelievable. Get out of here. I can't believe you. Similarly, depending on the context, a conventional facial expression of fear and surprise can be used either as a narrative tool to represent the reaction of an absent third party, or as a kind of performative to indicate agreement and affiliation. Faces can also function as quasi-proposition. For example, making a face may be a way of disagreeing with a speaker without explicitly stating your disagreement. There may be many reasons for resorting to this type of understated statement. For example, during a conference like this one, when you cannot or do not want to interact with to interrupt the speaker. Nonetheless, you want to let her know, and perhaps also others, well, maybe not possible tonight, that you think that what she's saying is false or wrong, and or that you strongly agree. You let your face speak for you. Or in a hierarchical context where you want to indicate either to the speaker or to others that you think the suggestion that has just been made is a bad idea, but that you will nonetheless comply. By making a face rather than protesting verbally, you allow the other to overlook an objection that you never really or clearly formulated, and at the same time making it possible for him or her to take it into account. In such cases, faces made are subtle conversational tools rather than conventionalized narrative illustrations. We use them to do something in the here and now rather than to represent something that happened at another time and place. We make faces to object, to approve, to question, to dismiss, to ridicule, to discount, or lessen what is being said by another. I define this use of face as quasi-proposition because the faces made, though they may show a transparent, recognizable intention, for example, to negate what has just been said, are nonetheless usually such that they allow the face-making individual to claim that he or she did not say or mean anything. One could say that such made faces are utterances that have weak locutionary and illocutionary force, but that can nonetheless have powerful perlocutionary effects. Three further remarks concerning the second type of face, quasi-proposition, are in order. First, they are often associated with moments of equivocation, to a situation where, for example, I want to go with you, but I do not want to go where you suggest that we should go. And sometimes even to moments of double equivocation, in the sense that I would like you to know that I do not want to go there, but I do not want to tell you clearly. I do not want explicitly to oppose your wish. The face that I make that is then a vehicle to carry all of that contradictory information. And it does it better and usually faster than language could. You, in return, are asked to respond appropriately. That is to say, you will be judged by how you react. Second, such faces, equivocal or not, are often addressed to third parties as much and sometimes even more than to the person to whom they respond. They serve to recruit allies, to ask for forgiveness or help, to mock or to disparage the speaker. Thirdly, there does not seem to be any canonical expression or conventionalized faces for the various speech acts that we can make with our face. Unlike what is the case for faces used as narrative tools, in the context of a dialogue as opposed to that of narration, there does not seem to be conventionalized displays that corresponds to the various negative, dismissive, mocking, sad, or pleading face that we make. Conversational faces arise in the context of an ongoing exchange within which they are interpreted, and only there do they gain their meaning. Finally, we also make faces to share fun with someone. In a pleasant and humorous exchange, we make funny, ridiculous faces. We also make faces to make fun of, at someone or of someone, to tease others, either in a friendly, amusing way or in a nasty, aggressive way, trying to ridicule and to belittle them. These may be considered as a special kind of conversational tool, special to the extent that they can be completely independent from any and all verbal communication. As considered above, faces as conversational tools usually intervene in the context of verbal exchange, where they serve to enhance some aspect of what is being said. Funny faces often are independent of any such context. and can easily put an end to verbal communication. The faces of those who make faces are all different and unique. We can recognize them as such and identify the speaker, that is the face maker. Of course, we sometimes make mistakes in this identification, but these mistakes overall are quite rare. The faces made are conversational and narrative as conversational and narrative tools are always made by someone who has a particular face distinct from that of any other person. And these communication devices are tinted, so to speak, by the particular characteristic of the face which makes them. Programs that automatically recognize the positive or negative facial expression of a person have so far usually been only successful when applied to a particular individual on which the program was trained. Applied to other individuals, the program's success is not better than random. Given that such faces corresponds to conventionalized expression, it is clear that we can do much better. Just as we understand what people say, even though each one has a different voice, we can recognize faces made by different individuals, even though each one has his or her own particular face. It is therefore one of the characteristics of the human face that it carries two very different types of information. It can transmit universal signification, like words, and it constitutes an indication of singularity, like the voice. So faces and the expression of emotion. The claim so far has been that making faces correspond to two different types of action. On the one hand, faces serve as narrative tools, conventionalized expression or illustrations of third parties' reactions to diverse situations. Such faces are descriptors. On the other, faces are conversational tools, quasi-proposition or partial or complete performatives. In both cases, faces constitute a central component of the nonverbal dimension of language, that is to say, postures, gestures, pitch, tone of voice, and faces, all the various ways in which our whole body is involved when we speak and participates in the meaning. Faces, therefore, are meaningful action. What the faces we make are not is simple readouts of emotion, nor do they correspond to the automatic, obligatory expression of affect programs. To put it otherwise, faces are essentially social, conversational, and narrative tools. As numerous studies have shown, we mainly make faces when we interact with others. Basic emotion theories, for their part, understand facial expression as the outside manifestation of an internal subjective event, an emotion. The emotion is construed as a mental and or physiological state that results from or is caused by an external event. For example, an encounter with a dangerous predator will cause fear. In consequence, the agent's expressed emotion, his or her facial display, is not meaningful. At least, it is not meaningful further than expressing the emotion which it is. To put it in another way, from basic emotion theory's point of view, the expression of an emotion does not mean anything else than what it is: fear, anger, joy, surprise, and so on. Just like a river is a river and only means a river, facial displays are what they display. To the opposite, any meaningful sign, whether it is an icon, an index, or a symbol, refers to that is, signifies something that it is not. Conventional and narrative tools, faces made, are meaningful signs. The absence of meaning of effective expression in basic emotion theories has to some extent been inherited from Darwin's influential The Expression of Emotion in Man and Animal. Contrary to what many people think and to what some have claimed, Darwin proposes a non-adaptationist approach to the expression of emotion. That is to say, according to him, the expression of emotion does not, as such, serve any useful biological purpose. There has never been direct selection for the ability to express one's emotion, nor does it enhance fitness. Rather, as Friedland argues, in documents, Darwin's goal was to show that the expression of emotion illustrates the limited power of natural selection. Darwin's goal was to show that the expression of its imperfection, if you prefer, compared to the action of an all-powerful God who can ensure the perfect adaptation of animals and that all of their features serve a specific purpose. To the opposite, argues Darwin, natural selection does not do things perfectly well. Many aspects of human and other animals are not well adapted, and most organisms exhibit some useless features. Darwin's thesis is that the expression of emotion in man and animal is a clear example of a non-adapted feature, but non-adapted in a way that is different from the maladapted features produced by sexual selection. For example, a peacock's tail, though it constitutes a liability in many circumstances, also provides reproductive advantages to the animal. According to Darwin, we do not express our emotions to communicate our inner thoughts and feelings to others in order, for example, to better coordinate our action, but we essentially because we cannot do otherwise. We cannot do otherwise either for basic physiological reasons or because past selection pressure left in our bodies traces that are no longer useful. Basic emotion theories have inherited from Darwin not only the uselessness of the expression of emotion and of facial display, but also its inevitability. Ekman's effects program approach asserts, as Darwin's three principles imply, that whenever an agent experiences a basic emotion, he or she necessarily spontaneously expresses it in its canonical way that is universally recognizable. It is true that later on he introduces the notion of culturally specific display rules that constrain the expression of emotion in various circumstances. However, leaving to the side that display rules appear to be ad hoc hypotheses to deal with anomalous empirical evidence, these rules only limit the full expression of the emotion, which the agents nonetheless cannot avoid expressing to some extent. Given this inevitability, it is difficult to understand what advantage could come from the expression of emotion, and by extension from facial display, since it leaves no room for strategic action. As long as emotion is conceived as being motivators antecedent to actions, it is hard to see what advantage could come to an organism from publicly broadcasting is emotion and motivation. Unless the goal is free collaboration, it is not clear what the organism can gain from informing any potential adversary of his intention and proximate action. The claim concerning the universality of the expression of basic emotion made by Ekman and Izar, among others, and still broadly accepted, has been subjected over the years to thorough scrutiny and often found wanting on many fronts. The methods used have been criticized, especially the choice of the respondent, mostly college students. The use of still photographs of emotion rather than movable displays. The use of forced response questionnaire. And of posed pictures rather than of spontaneous expression of emotions. Furthermore, tenets of basic emotion theories tend to overestimate the level of agreement in the recognition of emotion and to downplay divergence. Of special interest is the fact that respondents do not make random errors in recognizing different emotions. People do not confuse any given expression with any other equally, but have specific alternative choices. Surprise is frequently misidentified as fear, or vice versa, but rarely with happiness. Overall, nonetheless, of the level of recognition of the canonical forms of expression of anger, fear, happiness, distrust, sadness, and surprise is never strictly universal. Nonetheless, our ability to recognize canonical forms of expression is clearly better than random. What does this ability show? The main question, to put it otherwise, is what does the thesis of the universal recognition of basic emotion actually claim? As Friedland argues, this claim bundles together at least 4 different claims that are logically independent and should be individually evaluated as they require different methods of proof. First, there is the claim that basic emotions have a canonical expression, understood in the sense that each one of them has an expression that is typically the same whenever the emotion is experienced. The second claim is that this canonical expression is universally recognizable. Everyone and anyone, it is claimed, can recognize anger, sadness, and any other of the basic emotion when he or she sees it. Or put in a different way, when agents are exposed to or tested with these canonical expressions, the level of mistakes they make should be low. Third is the claim that this expression is involuntary and automatic. Persons may be able to repress or hide the expression of an emotion to some extent, but its onset is beyond their control. This claim plays a fundamental role in questions related to ethics, since it often serves to the ethics of robots, since it often serves to distinguish between true, genuine, and false or fake emotions. Finally, these emotions in humans and their expression are considered to be under genetic control. Here we are therefore endowed with basic emotion as part of a genetic heritage. However, as Friedland correctly points out, none of these claims strictly implies or is implied by the other. To start with, whether or not emotions have canonical expression is independent of whether or not they are under genetic control. Among humans, many features, for example, height or language, that show important variation between individual and population are under strict genetic control. Therefore, universality is not a proof of genetic control in any way. Similarly, that anger or any other emotion is universally recognizable as such does not imply that it has a canonical expression, or vice versa, nor that its expression is involuntarily or not automatic. These are 4 independent claims that are logically detachable. The truth or falsity of any one of them is independent of the truth and falsity of any of the others. As mentioned earlier, one reproach that has been addressed to Ekman's research method is the use of photographs of posed emotion rather than pictures of the spontaneous expression of persons in the tumult of an emotion. His response to this criticism has been that clear, spontaneous expression of basic emotions are rare and difficult to find because in most circumstances, people may be experiencing more than one emotion simultaneously, or because they try to hide or distort their expression for various reasons. Overlooking for now the paradox of universally recognizable automatic expression, canonical expression of emotions that are so rarely spontaneously used in life that it is impossible to find 6 or 7 paradigmatic examples, one research that tried to reproduce Ekman's result using spontaneous rather than posed picture of emotion found a significantly lower level of agreement among respondents. In some cases, success that recognizes emotion was no better than random. Interestingly, then, it seems that people are more competent at recognizing posed emotion from still picture than they are at recognizing spontaneous expression of emotions. Why would that be? Crivelli and Friedland in recent articles set out to test some of Ekman's and Friesen's results gathered in non-Western culture. Ekman and his collaborators have long been aware that one weakness of their research was that they at first conducted their inquiries in Western cultures only, mostly the United States and some European countries. They therefore widened their field of research to include first Japan and Indonesia, and then some non-literate, non-Western cultures, two populations from Papua New Guinea. Again, in Japan and Indonesia, the population tested consisted of college students, therefore persons likely to have seen films from Western countries and who had been exposed to a fair amount of Western culture. Concerning the two non-literate culture, the situation was different. And though Ekman claimed that the result he obtained confirmed his hypothesis, at least one of the members of the original team, an anthropologist, disputed that claim. Crivelli, Girillo, and Friedland engaged in a long-term research in one of those two cultures and also reviewed the data from Ekman. Two of the conclusions they reach are, I think, important and significant. First, they argue that as we move from Western culture, the capacity to recognize the 7 canonical forms of expression diminishes. Less a population has been influenced by Western culture, and more its members make mistakes when asked to identify the various expression of emotions. Second, they show that among these populations, the patterns of mistakes are not random. One interesting example of such non-random mistake concerns people from the Trobriand Islands. Native from these islands tend to confuse the canonical image of surprise for an expression of fear. This, as Crivelli and I'll show, cannot be seen as a simple mistake. Actually, the canonical expression of surprise in Ekman's sample corresponds rather closely to the way fear is classically represented in their culture, a gasping face with large eyes. This fact, they claim, shows that the expression of emotion is culturally relative rather than universal. However, in order to show that, they argue researchers need to invest in long-term fieldwork in a different culture. Otherwise, they are likely to label as simple mistake what really is a different expression of emotion. In other words, according to them, Trobrianders do not express fear in the same way people from Western cultures do. They also add that this facial expression of fear has become iconic in the Trobrianders' material culture, giving examples of artistic representation of evil creatures, spirits, or demons that are depicted with large eyes and large gasping mouth. Note, however, that these are fearsome rather than fearful creatures. The respondents would have identified the image of surprise with fear because that is the emotion experienced when confronted with such an expression. Rather than expressing fear, the gasping face with large eye is representative of a spirit that causes fear. In this case also, it is not clear if Ekman's research protocol would have been able to recognize this difference. That is it precise enough to distinguish between different ways in which people associate iconic representation with various emotions? According to Crivelli and A, in the context of a non-literate society, the answer is no. Such fine distinction are only possible if the researcher has a good knowledge of the local native language, which no member of Ekman's research group had. The faces that we make, I argued earlier, are either narrative tools, which corresponds to conventional expression of emotion, or conventional tools, conversational tools, which it seems do not have any canonical expression. That is why when shown stills picture of spontaneous emotions, people generally fail to recognize them correctly. as Bavelas and Chauville, as well as Lang, argue, such expressions are interpreted and gain their meaning in the context of ongoing social exchange and conversation. Taken individually, out of context, as a frozen movement of expression, the faces that we make in conversation, unless they are conventionalized expression, that is, narrative tools, are too diverse, fleeting, and ambiguous to be interpreted properly. That is why Ekman had to resort to pictures of posed expression. These posed expressions correspond to narrative tools. They are conventionalized representations of an emotion, just as we recognize with a fair amount of success the emotions that they conventionally represent. People from the Trobriand island, following a different cultural convention, recognize different emotions. That the canonical expression of basic emotion have become conventionalized representation of these various emotions seems very clear now that for more than 50 years, so many books in psychology or philosophy reproduce the same prototypical images. We all know what the different basic emotions should look like. However, this fact, I believe, this has been the case from the beginning, from when those images were originally chosen by a group of independent judges from a much wider collection of pictures of posed emotion. The judge retained the images which they thought best represented the different emotions. On what basis? From Charles Le Brun, 17th century illustration of the Passion, according to Descartes, to Frank Xavier Messerschmitt's sculptures of the characters, there is a rich iconographic tradition relative to the emotion, what each one looks like, and how painters, sculptors, or actors should represent them has been discussed, painted, and engraved many times. The conventional representation of emotion has a long history, and the picture that we find in the textbooks of psychology do not in any way break with that history. Our gaze has been trained by centuries of shared culture. There is nothing surprising to the common ability in our culture to recognize these conventional representation, different cultures that remain sufficiently isolated from Western influence have different conventions. Robots. Robots, as I understand the term, are three-dimensional solids that at any time occupy one and only one place in physical space, which means that characters on a screen and digital agents of different types are not robots. There are many reasons to keep these two categories separate. They have very different characteristics. One of the most important, according to me, is that the individuality and identity of a digital agent is disjoint or separated from its physical or visual manifestation. Of course, we give names like Alexa or Siri to the visual manifestation of such agents. But not only is it the case that the agents, the program which constitute it, is not there on the screen, but also that the same program can drive a large number of agent tokens. That is to say, the same digital agent can simultaneously act or produce an effect in more than one location in physical space. With this interacting with distinct individuals interacting with different copies of the interface. Each person interacting with a different token, but all of them in contact with the same agent. To put it again in a different way, two copies of the same programs are not two programs, they are not two individuals, but only one and the same program. However, two Pepper robots are two individuals, two different robots, not one and the same robot, no matter how similar they may be. This is an immediate result of the fact that they are material objects rather than mathematical objects, which is what digital agents ultimately are. Because the individuality of digital agents is independent of and disjoint from their physical appearance, these agents notwithstanding the commercial names they sometimes receive, are radically anonymous. They have no face, no physical, visible, or visual feature that can reveal or hide who and what they are. More precisely, they cannot have a face. They cannot be visually represented. At best, figures on the screen or avatars can be viewed as icons of programs, images that evoke but that cannot represent and even less present what is essentially an abstract mathematical idea. To the opposite, the identity of a robot cannot be separated from its physical shape and material being. Does a robot, say, like Paro, Pepper, Now, or iCub, have a face? The first thing to note to answer that question is that when humans interact with a robot, rather than a digital agent, they always, in a sense, interact face to face, in person, if you prefer. In consequence, we always attribute to the robot whatever it is that it did, whether it broke a chair, smiled at us, brought us coffee, or greeted me and informed me of today's weather forecast, as does RoboV at ATR. The robot is always at least causally responsible for what it does. As far as this attribution of responsibility is concerned, it does not matter whether the robot is autonomous or semi-autonomous. In any case, it is the robot, this robot, rather than that one that acted, that broke down, or responded. To what or to who any moral responsibility for the action should be attributed is a different issue. However, no matter how we answer that last question, and the answer will be different in different cases, the causal or material attribution of the action is always clear. The robot did it, and this allows for immediate remedial in the case of unfortunate actions. This does not mean that the corrective will necessarily be easy, simply that the need for one is evident. However, when a digital agent provides an unfortunate answer to a person's query, it cannot always be known if it malfunctioned or not. To the opposite, robots, in a minimal sense of at least, have a face. They are not radically anonymous because they are causally and or materially directly responsible for their action. The robots which we make today generally have what may be called a generic face and cannot make faces. By generic faces, I mean that like different motor vehicle of the same model, different Peppers, Now, Paro, Keep-On, or Caspar all look fundamentally alike. They are tokens of the same models that have the same face and general appearance. Those robots which do not have a generic face, like the robots of Ishiguro's Geminoid series, have facial features which are closely modeled on those of a specific human. In the case of the Geminoid series, the objective, as the series name suggests, is to create a double of the person, a robot that is as much as possible indistinguishable from a human original. The cases of Sophia, modeled on Audrey Hepburn, or of the Einstein robot, both developed by Hanson Robotics, are different. Sophia, in spite of its very human-like facial feature, does not hide that it is a robot. The face is mounted on an evidently robotic head, while the Einstein robot, which is a teaching robot, does not so much closely reproduce the famous physicist's feature as it takes advantage of the image of Einstein as a cultural icon of knowledge and intelligence. Some robots, for example, Sophia, Einstein, but also Kismet, and some Gemini and Paro, have movable facial features that can facial features that can change in response to the facial expression or affective state of the robot's interlocutor. These robots can, to some extent, express emotion facially. I would argue, however, that they cannot make faces. Of course, There are some important technical difficulties here due to the high number of muscle groups that control human facial expression and the rapidity at which we can change from one expression to another. In consequence, it is extremely difficult to make robotic faces that can do more than display a few conventionalized expressions of emotion. This is already quite an achievement and should not be minimized. However, human faces do much more than simply express conventionalized emotions. Human facial display, argues Fidland, like most animal displays, take place in a context of strategic negotiation. To say that the context is strategic does not imply that it is necessarily adversarial. To say that it constitutes a negotiation does not demand that every or even any step in the exchange be conscious. What fundamentally characterizes any negotiation is the uncertainty of the outcome. Furthermore, when you negotiate the price of a house or of a used car, not only is the result uncertain, but your first offer is not usually your final offer. A negotiation is a dynamic process, which usually is path-dependent to some extent. The same applies to facial expression and to the faces that we make. The final offer comes at the end and is different from what was the beginning of the negotiation. As in successful commercial negotiation or labor disputes, the final offer often constitutes something like a resolution of the exchange. However, in this case, the issue to be resolved, unlike the price of a car or the health benefits of part-time employees, is not external to the parties involved. For what is to be negotiated is each party's attitude towards each other. Each party's attitude towards the other in a context where an important variable in determining my attitude towards you is your attitude towards me, and vice versa. The uncertainty is not just that I do not know what you will do, but that you do not know what you will do, for that depends on what I will do, which in turn depends on what you will do. This structure of negotiation, to some extent, helps explain why facial displays are dynamic, why facial expression can change so rapidly, why they are fluid and undetermined the meaning they suggest. It explains why any facial expression can mean or suggest highly different things depending on the context. For example, Provine and Fisher in 1999 report that 80% of adult smiles and laughs are precipitated by non-humorous events. Why else do we smile? Well, we smile out of joy at happy events. We also smile to greet others. We smile when we agree with them or grant them their request. We smile to indicate our good disposition towards them. We may also smile to suggest that we cannot do anything about the situation, that we're helpless. We sometimes smile when we disagree. We smile when we have won, and sometimes we smile when we have lost. It may be argued that in these different cases, the smile is not the same. However, still pictures of such smiles and other effective expressions presented out of context are not correctly identified. The main reason why, apart from the present technical limitations, robots only have generic face is because they do not need to enter in such negotiation. They do not have anything to lose or gain in social exchange. They are indifferent to their relation to their human partners. To them, it is all the same. This lack of effective involvement is usually reproached to robots. The claim being that they cheat their human partners, pretending to have emotions which they do not have. This is considered as morally reprehensible, and some critics have even argued that the use of emotionally expressive and responsive robot should be banned or at least strictly regulated. The issue, I think, is exactly the opposite. The fundamental limitation of present-day robots is that they cannot cheat. They cannot dissimulate, pretend, equivocate, or lie. Robots are technically and theoretically, in reason of the dominance of basic emotion theories, limited to producing conventionalized expression of emotion, like cartoon characters or avatar in video games. They cannot be ambiguous or uncertain in their relation with their human partners, because that is not what we ask from them. They cannot show simultaneously that, yes, I will do it, but I would rather not. A robot can be taken away from someone who has become attached to it, or the robot can be reprogrammed to act in a radically different way. But whatever the robot does, it does it without any afterthought or hesitation, without ambiguity or dissimulation. This complete truthfulness and utter lack of ambiguity and hesitation is, I suspect, part of what gives them away as robots rather than full-fledged social partners like other humans. Unlike what is the case when even in our relation with animals, here in human-robot interaction, there is no need to tend to the relation, to pay heed to its evolution, to be careful or to nurture it. Present-day robots will not and cannot dissimulate or be hurt or be unfaithful. That is their problem and major limitation. Thank you.